Hi everyone. So our report is about computer fraud. So before we discuss, we have here the learning objectives. So after studying this chapter, you should be able to first explain the threats faced by modern information systems. Number two, define fraud and describe both the different types of fraud and the process one follows to perpetuate a fraud. Number three, discuss who perpetrates fraud and why it occurs, including the pressures, opportunities, and rationalization that are present in the most fraud. Number four, define computer fraud and discuss the different computer fraud classifications. Number five, explain how to prevent and detect computer fraud and abuse. So before that, what is an accounting information system? So an accounting information system involves the collection, storage, and processing of financial and accounting data used by internal users to report information to investors, creditors, and tax authorities. It is generally a computer-based method for tracking accounting activity in conjunction with information technology resources. As accounting information system grows more complex to meet our scaling needs for information, companies face the growing risk that their systems may be compromised. We have four types of accounting information system threats that a company faces today. First is the natural and political disaster. Natural and political disasters such as fire, floods, earthquake, hurricane, tornadoes, blizzards, wars, and attack by a terrorist. It can destroy an information system and cause many companies to fail. For example, a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York City and on the Federal Building in Oklahoma City destroyed or disrupt all the system in those buildings. Second is the software errors and equipment malfunction. Hardware and software failures, software errors or bug, operating system crashes, power outage and fluctuations, undetected data transmission errors are the example of software errors and equipment malfunction. Another example of the second threat is a bug in Burger King software. It resulted in 4,334,000.33 debit card charge for 4 hamburgers. The cashier accidentally keyed in the 4.33 charge twice, resulting in the overcharge. The third threat to accounting information system is unintentional acts. Unintentional acts such as accident or innocent errors and omission is the greatest risk to information system and causes the greatest dollar losses. The Computing Technology Industry Association estimates that human errors cause 80% of security problems. Unintentional acts are caused by human carelessness, failure to follow established procedures, and poorly trained or supervised personnel. Users lost or misplaced data and accidentally erase or alter files, data, and programs. Computer operators and users enter wrong place data files. System analysts develop systems that do not meet company needs, that leave them vulnerable to attack, or that are incapable of handling their intent tasks. Programmers make logic errors. Another example is a bank programmer mistakenly calculated interest for each month using 31 days. So before the mistake was discovered, over $100,000 in excess interest was paid. The last threat to accounting information system is intentional acts. Intentional acts such as computer crime, a fraud or sabotage, which is deliberate destruction or harm to a system. Information systems are increasingly vulnerable to attack. For example, the activist hacker group called Anonymous played Santa Claus one Christmas, indicating that they were granting wishes to people who are less fortunate than most. They were inundated with requests for iPads, iPhone, pizzas, and hundreds of other things. They hacked into banks and sent over 1 million worth of virtual credit cards to the people. So now let's proceed. What is fraud? Fraud is gaining an unfair advantage over another person. Also, fraud is an intentional deceptive action designed to provide the perpetrator with an unlawful gain or to deny a right to a victim. So, so legally, for an act to be fraudulent, there must be number 1, a false statement, representation, or disclosure. Number 2, a material fact, which is something that induces a person to act. Number 3, an intent to deceive. Number 4, a justifiable reliance. That is, the person relies on the misrepresentation to take an act. And lastly, an injury or loss suffered by the victim. Most fraud perpetrators are knowledgeable insider with the requisite access, skills, and resources. Because employees understand the company's system and its weaknesses, they are better able to commit and conceal a fraud. The controls used to protect corporate asset make it more difficult for an insider to steal from a company. Fraud perpetrators are often referred to as white-collar criminals. The example of fraud are corruption and investment fraud. So, corruption is dishonest conduct by those in power, and it often involves actions that are illegitimate, immoral, or incompatible with ethical standards. Examples of corruption are bribery and bid rigging. Next is investment fraud. Investment fraud is misrepresenting or leaving out facts in order to promote an investment that promises fantastic profit with little or no risk. The example of investment fraud are Ponzi scheme and security fraud. Next is 2 types of fraud that are important to businesses. First is misappropriation of asset, also called employee fraud, and fraudulent financial reporting, also called management fraud, and that would be discussed further by Floribel Bagsi.
Misappropriation of asset. It is a theft of a company assets by employees. So, misappropriation of asset, ito yung mga asset ng isang company na ninanakaw ng mga employees. Example of that is a manager who is responsible for processing bills, embezzled 1 million over a 5-year period. He faked a superior signature on invoices for services never performed, and then submitted them to account payable and faked the endorsement on a check and deposit it in his account. So a manager used the stolen fund to buy for his personal properties. So another example is a bank Vice President approved 1 billion in bad loans in exchange for 585,000 in kickbacks. The loan cost the banks 800 million and helped trigger in collapse. Here are the following important elements or characteristic of a typical misappropriation. So the perpetrator must gain first the trust and confidence of the entity being frauded. So kailangan niya munang makagain ng trust bago siya kumuha ng pera sa isang company. Next is uses trickery, cunning, or false or misleading information to commit fraud. So, gaya ng ginawa ng manager sa example na he faked to sign the invoices for services na never pa na perform. Conceals the fraud by falsifying record or other information. So, like kagain na din na nag-record siya ng account payable na wala naman talaga account na babayaran or binabayaran. Next is rarely terminates the fraud voluntarily. Next, sees how easy it is to get extra money. So, yung iba daw, madali lang sila na makakuha ng extra money kapag nagnanakaw sila. Yung iba naman, talagang kailangan nila kaya sila nagnakaw o yung iba talagang parang greediness na sa kanila na magnakaw ng isang money sa isang kumpanya. At kung yung person or the perpetrator is mag-continue siya sa pagnanakaw, or mag-stop siya sa pagnanakaw, dito na kasi makikita ng isang company na may mga mali silang ginagawa. Next is the spend ill-gotten gains. Rarely does the perpetrator save or invest the money. Some perpetrators come to depend on the extra income and other adopt on lifestyle that requires even greater amount of money. So, yun na nga. Kadalasan kasi yung mga extra income nila na sinasabi or pag-steal ng isang pera or misappropriation sa isang company, mas malaki kasi makukuha nila kumpara sa salaries na nagigain nila. Yung iba naman is sa parating silang nag-steal, parang lifestyle na parang ginagawa na nilang lifestyle yon. Next is the gets greedy and takes ever larger amount of money at internals that are more frequent. O yun na nga, yung iba kasi nasasanay na palagi sila ng kumukuha at parang palaki na rin yung kinukuha nila. Next is the gross careless or overconfident as time passes. So, sa paulit-ulit na nag-misappropriation sila of asset, parang naging careless na sila to the point na nadidiscover na sila na isang company na does something wrong. So, next is a fraudulent financial reporting. So, according to National Commission of Fraudulent Financial Reporting or the Tradeway Commission, it is defined as intentional or reckless conduct, whether by an act or omission, that result in materially misleading financial statement. So, bakit nga ba yung mga management gina-falsifies yung mga financial statement? It is because they want to deceive investors and creditors. They want to increase a company's stock price, meet cash flow needs, or hide companies' losses or problems. The Treasury Commission studied 450 lawsuits against auditors and found undetected fraud to be a factor in half of them. So, through the years, many highly publicized financial statement frauds have occurred. So in that case, ang misrepresented financial statement nagalid siya sa huge financial losses and a number of bankruptcies. So the most frequent or the cook the book schemes involve fictitiously inflating revenues, holding the books open, which is the recognizing revenues before they are earned, or closing the books early, it is delaying current expenses to a later period, overstating inventories or fixed asset, and concealing losses and liabilities. There are four Tradeway Commission recommendation action to reduce fraudulent financial reporting. So first is to establish an organizational environment that contributes to the integrity of financial reporting process. Second is to identify and understand the factors that lead to fraudulent financial reporting. For example, of that is it will lead to financial huge financial losses or a number of bankruptcies. So number four or the last one is to design and implement internal control to provide reasonable assurance of preventing fraudulent financial reporting. According to ASFA found that an asset misappropriation is 17 times more likely than fraudulent financial reporting, but that the amount is involved are much smaller. So, ang result niya, ang auditor and management are more concerned sila sa fraud and financial reporting kahit na um, kahit na madalas na encounter yung mga misappropriation. Why? Because appropriation is mas gamay yung or mas maliit yung amount of money compare sa compare sa fraudulent financial reporting. And ang fraudulent financial reporting kasi is nagalid siya sa huge financial losses or bankruptcies, while ang misappropriation is hindi naman masyado kasi nga maliit lang yung pera, yung maliit lang yung nakukuhang asset ng mga perpetrator. So here are the auditor's responsibility to detect fraud of Statement of Auditing Standard or SAS number 99. First, auditor's responsibility is to understand the fraud. Why? Because auditors cannot effectively audit something they do not understand. They must understand fraud and how and why it is committed. Second is to discuss the risk of material fraudulent misstatement. So, habang nagaplano yung mga audit, team members discuss among themselves how and where the company's financial statement are susceptible to fraud. Next is obtain information. So, ang audit team must gather evidence by looking for fraud risk factor, testing company's record, asking management, the audit committee of the board of directors, and other whether they know of past or current fraud. Because maraming mga fraud na na-involve revenues recognition, especially care is exercised in examining revenues account. So, next is identify, access, and respond to rest. So, ano yung mga i-identify, access, and response to rest? That will be the evidence that is a need to identify. To spoon the fraud rest by verifying the nature, timing, extent of audit procedure, and by evaluating carefully the rest of management overriding internal control. So, the next is to evaluate the result of their audit test. So, ang auditor must evaluate whether identified misstatement indicate the presence of fraud or determine its impact on the financial statement on the audit. So, next is document and communicate findings. So, auditor must document yung mga na-gather nila na information and communicate their finding to the management and to the audit committee. Next is incorporate a technology focus. So, in SAS number 99 recognizes the impact technology has on fraud risk and provide commentary and examples recognizing this impact. It is also notes to opportunities, these auditors have to use technology to design fraud auditing procedure. So, ngayon kasi, kadalasan yung mga fraud ginagawa nila through online. So, kailangan nila na incorporate technology focuses. So, who perpetrates fraud and why? So, when researchers compared the psychological and demographic characteristics of white-collar criminals and violent criminals in the public, they found significant differences between violent and white-collar criminals. They found few differences between white-collar criminals and the public. Their conclusion, many fraud perpetrators look just like you and me. So, who perpetrates fraud? They are the good people who did bad things. Who are them? Some fraud perpetrators are disgruntled and unhappy with their jobs and seek revenge against employees. So, others are dedicated, hardworking, and trusted employees. Most have no previous criminal record, but and they were honest, valued, and respect members of the community. So, in other words, they were good people who did bad things. So, the next is the computer fraud perpetrators. They are typically younger and possess more computer experience and skills. Some are motivatedly by curiosity, a quest of knowledge, the desire to learn how things work, and the challenge of beating the system. Some view their action as a game rather than dishonest behavior. Others commit computer fraud to gain stature in the hacking community. So next is the first time fraud perpetrator. They are the one that are not caught or that the one that are caught but not prosecuted. But they are moved from being unintentional fraudsters or to serial fraudsters. So next is the cyber criminal. They are the top FBA priority because they have moved from isolated and uncoordinated attack to organized fraud scheme targeted at a specific individual and businesses. They they use online payment companies to launder their ill-gotten gains to hide their money. They take advantage of the lack of coordination between international law enforcement organizations. So karamihan kasi is yung nagaganap na mga fraud is cyber criminals.
Number 2, conceal the fraud. Conceal means keep from the sight or hide. Conceal the frauds often takes more effort and time and leaves behind more evidence than the theft or misrepresentation. Taking requires only a few seconds, but altering records to hide the theft is more challenging and time-consuming. So, to prevent detection from assets are stolen or financial statements are overstated, perpetrators must keep the accounting equation in balance by inflating other assets or decreasing liabilities or equity. So, we have 3 ways for employees to theft company assets. First, charge the stolen item to an expense account. Second, using lapping scam. And third, using check kitting scam. In charge the stolen item to an expense account, the perpetrator's exposure is limited to a year or less. Because expense accounts are zeroed out the end of each year, perpetrators who hide a theft in a balance sheet account must continue the concealment. Using lapping scam naman, it involves two asset accounts the cash and accounts receivable. So this using lapping scheme is the cover up must continue indefinitely unless the money is replaced or the debt is written off the books. A company can hide the theft of cash using check kiting scheme. Because cash is created using the lag between the time a check is deposited and the time it clears the bank. So the scam continues, writing checks and making deposits as needed to keep the checks from bouncing until the person is caught or he deposits money to cover the created and stolen cash. So the electronic banking systems make it harder because the time between a fraudster depositing the check in one bank and the check being presented to the other bank for payment is shortened. So number 3, convert the theft into mispresentation to personal gain. In a misappropriation, fraud perpetrators who do not steal cash or use the stolen assets personally must convert them to a spendable form. For example, employees who steal inventory or equipment, sell the items or otherwise convert them to cash. In cases of falsified financial statements, perpetrators convert their actions to personal gain through indirect benefits. That is, they keep their job, their stock rises, they receive pay raises and promotions, or they gain more power and influence. So as you can see, table 5 to 4, opportunities permitting employee and financial statement fraud. It is the least frequently mentioned opportunities. Many opportunities are the result of a deficient system of internal control, such as deficiencies in proper segregation of duties, authorization procedures, clear lines of authority, proper supervision, adequate documents and records, safeguarding assets, or independent checks on performance. Management permits fraud by inattention or carelessness. Management commits frauds by overriding internal controls or using a position of power to compel subordinates to perpetrate it. So, every companies who do not perform a background check on potential employees risk hiring. In one case, a company president stopped by the office one night. Other opportunities, other factor provided an opportunity, to commit and conceal fraud when the company has unclear policies and procedures, fails to teach and stress corporate honesty, and fails to provocate the those who penetrate fraud. So, in internal control factors, that's the list of internal control factors and opportunities permitting employee and financial statement fraud and other factors. So in rationalization allows perpetrators to justify their illegal behavior. So it is the excuses that fraud perpetrators use to justify their illegal behavior. So, the most frequent rationalizations include the following: I am only borrowing it and I will repay my loan. You would understand if you knew how badly I need it. What I did was not the serious, it was for a good cause. In my very important position of trust, I am above the rules. Everyone else is doing it. No one will ever know. The company owes it to me. I am taking no more than it is rightly fully mine. So this fraud occurs when people have high pressures, an opportunity to commit, conceal, and convert, and the ability to rationalize away their personal integrity. So more or less likely to occur when people have few pressures, little opportunity, and high personal integrity. That's why they did that illegal behavior. So, it can be prevented by eliminating or minimizing one or more fraud triangle elements. Although companies can reduce or minimize some pressures and rationalizations, the greatest opportunity to prevent fraud lies in reducing or minimizing opportunity by implementing a good system of internal controls and internal controls, I mean. So next is computer fraud. So computer fraud is any fraud that requires computer technology to perpetrate it. Examples include unauthorized theft, use, access, modification, and copying or destructions of software, hardware, or data, theft of assets covered up by altering computer records, obtaining information or triangle property illegally using computers. So, the rise in computer fraud. So, as you observe or have knowledge about computer can many fraud or mistakes that you can commit, because through computer people can easily break or making mistake through computer. So people who break into corporate database base can steal, destroy, or alter massive amounts of data in every little time. So you can easily make mistakes through computer. It makes it easier. So computer fraud can be much more difficult to detect than other types of fraud. Some organizations grant employees, customers, and suppliers access to their system. So the number and variety of these access points significantly increase the risk. Computer programs need to be modified illegally only once for them to operate improperly for as long as they are in use. So personal computers are vulnerable. It is difficulty to control physical access to each PC that access a network and pieces, and their data can be lost, stolen, or misplaced. Also, PC users are generally less aware of the importance of security and control. The more legitimate users there are, the greater the risk of an attack on the networks. So computer systems face a number of unique challenges: reliability, equipment failure, dependency on power, damage from water or fire, vulnerability to electromagnetic interference, and interruption and eavesdropping. So all in all, computer fraud or any type you can make or commit any type of fraud that requires computer technology to perpetrate easily. And through computer, it is difficult to detect that other types of fraud. Examples is hacking. Hacking or means unauthorized access, modification, or use of an electronic device or some element of a computer system. So we have several reasons to commit computer fraud. Number one, not everyone agrees on what constitutes computer fraud. So many people do not believe that copying software constitutes computer fraud. Software publishers think otherwise and prosecute those who make illegal copies. Some people do not think it is a crime to browse someone else's computer files if they do not harm, whereas companies' whole data are browsed feel much differently. So that means browsing data or files is considered fraud without the consent, or you are not the authorized person to browse that kind of file. Number two, many instances of computer fraud go undetected. People can create that kind of fraud if you are really expert in IT. You can conceal or hide the files or data using computer. So, dapat knowledgeable ka about IT. Kasi kung hindi mo talaga malalaman na may mga nakatagong mga files or mga informations or na-steal na mga assets ng isang company. So, dapat you are knowledgeable enough. So, number 3, a high percentage of fraud is not reported. So, many companies believe that adverse publicity would result in copycat fraud and a loss of computer confidence, which could cost more than the fraud itself. That's why they prefer to steal. That's why they're still doing to commit fraud. So number 4, many networks are not secure. Yes. So make sure that all networks that you are connected are secured to avoid that kind of fraud. Number 5, internet sites offer step-by-step instruction on how to perpetrate computer fraud and abuse. That's why many people or employees committed that kind of fraud. Because through computer pa rin nila nalalaman kung paano mag-perpetrate ng mga or mag-steal ng mga assets. So, lahat sa computer na rin nakikita. Next, number 6, law enforcement cannot keep up with the growth of computer fraud. Why law informants cannot keep up with the growth of computer fraud? It is just because of lack of funding and skilled staff. So, the FBI investigates only 1 in 15 computer crimes. So, kulang talaga sila ng funding and skilled staff. That's why law enforcement cannot keep up with the growth of computer fraud. So, number 7 is calculating losses is difficult. Yes, it is very difficult to calculate total losses when information is stolen. Websites are defaced and viruses shut down entire computer system. Basta yung virus na, wala na talagang matitira. So next, the cyber sluts. Cyber sluts come from a variety of backgrounds, including accounting, information system, government, law enforcement, and military and banking. So these cyber sluts, the accountants use these cyber sluts specialize in catching fraud perpetrators. So, dapat in cyber slots, it needs the following. So, cyber slots needs the following skills. Number 1, ability to follow a trail, think analytically, and be thorough. Because fraud perpetrators leave tracks and a cyber slot must think analytically to follow paper and electronic trails and uncover fraud. They must be thorough so they do not miss or fail to follow up on use. Number 2, good understanding of information technology. So, cyber slots need to understand data storage, data communications, and how so retrieve hidden or deleted files and emails. So, number 3, ability to think like a fraud penetrator. Cyber sluts must understand what motivates perpetrators, how they think, and the scheme they use to commit and conceal the fraud. Number 4, ability to use hacking tools and techniques. So cyber sluts need to understand the tools computer criminals use to perpetrate fraud and abuse. So next is computer fraud classification. So we have 5 computer fraud classifications. Number 1, input fraud. So this is the simplest and common way to commit a computer fraud, to alter or falsify computer input. It requires little skill. Number 3, professor fraud. It includes unauthorized system use, including the theft of computer time and services. Number 3, computer instructions fraud. In computer instruction frauds, it includes tampering company software, copying software illegally, using software in an unauthorized manner, and developing software to carry out unauthorized activities. Number 4, data fraud. Illegally using, copying, browsing, searching, or harming company data constitute data fraud. Employee negligence is the biggest cause of data breaches. So number 5 is output fraud. In output fraud, unless property safeguard, displayed or printed output can be stolen, copied, or misused. So in it is ito yung itsura pag mag-create ka ng computer classification. Nasa gitna si Professor Fraud, which is includes unauthorized system use. Yan. And that's all. Dito lang nagtatapos ang aking report.
Preventing and detecting fraud and abuse. To prevent fraud, organizations must create a climate that makes fraud less likely, increases the difficulty of committing it, improves detection methods, and reduces the amount lost if a fraud occurs. Summary of ways to prevent and detect fraud. So the first one is make fraud less likely to occur. So under that are create an organizational culture that stresses integrity and commitment to ethical values and competence. Second, adopt an organizational structure management philosophy, operating style, and risk appetite that minimizes the likelihood of fraud. Third one, require oversight from an active, involved, and independent audit committee of the board of directors. Number four, assign authority and responsibility for business objectives to specific departments and individuals. Encourage them to use initiative to solve problems and hold them accountable for achieving those objectives. Number five, identify the events that lead to increased fraud risk and take steps to prevent, avoid, share, or accept that risk. Number six, develop a comprehensive set of security policies to guide the design and implementation of specific control procedures and communicate them effectively to company employees. Number seven, implement human resource policies for hiring, compensating, evaluating, promoting, and discharging employees that send messages about the required level of ethical behavior and integrity. Number eight, develop a comprehensive set of anti-fraud policies that clearly set forth the expectation of honest and ethical, explain the consequences of dishonest and fraudulent acts. Number nine, effectively supervise employees, including monitoring their performance and correcting their errors. Number 10, provide employee supports programs. This provides a place for employees to turn to when they face pressures they might be inclined to resolve by perpetrating a fraud. Number 11, maintain open communication lines with employees, customers, suppliers, and relevant external parties such as banks, regulators, tax authorities, or etc. Create and implement a company code of conduct to put it writing what the company expects of its employees. Number 12, train employees in integrity and ethical considerations, as well as security and fraud prevention measures. Number 13, require annual employee vacations and signed confidential, confidentiality agreements periodically rotate duties of key employees. Number 14, implement formal and rigorous project development and acquisition controls, as well as change management controls. And lastly, increase the penalty for committing fraud by prosecuting fraud perpetrators more vigorously. The second one is increase the difficulty of committing fraud. So under these are develop and implement a strong system of internal controls. Number 2, segregate the accounting functions of authorization, recording, and custody. Number 3, implement a proper segregation of duties between system functions. Number 4, restrict physical and remote access to system resources to authorized personnel. Number 5, require transactions and activities to be authorized by appropriate supervisory personnel. Have the system authenticate the person and their right to perform the transaction before allowing the transaction to take place. Number 6, use properly designed documents and records to capture and process transactions. Number 7, safeguard all assets, records, and data. Number 8, require independent checks on performance, such as reconciliation of two independent sets of records where practical. Number 9, implement computer-based controls over data input, computer processing, data storage, data transmission, and information output. Number 10, encrypt stored and transmitted data and programs to protect them from unauthorized access and use. Number 11, when disposing of used computers, destroy the hard drive to keep criminals from mining recycled hard drives. Lastly, fix software vulner- vulnerabilities by installing operating system updates, as well as security and application programs. Third one is improve detection methods. So under these are: first, develop and implement a fraud risk assessment program that evaluates both the likelihood and the magnitude of fraudulent activity and assesses the processes and controls that can deter and detect the potential fraud. Create an audit trail so individual transactions can be traced through the system to the financial statements, and financial statement data can be traced back to individual transactions. Number 2, conduct periodic external and internal audits as well as specific network security audits. This can be especially helpful if sometimes performed on a surprise basis. Number 3, install fraud detection software. Number 4, implement a fraud hotline. Number 5, motivate employees to report fraud by implementing whistleblower rewards and protections for those who come forward. Number 6, employ a computer security officer, computer consultants, and forensic specialists as needed. And lastly, monitor system activities including computer and network security efforts, usage and error logs, and all malicious actions. So, use intrusion detection system to help automate the monitoring process. The fourth one, reduce fraud losses. So under these are: number 1, maintain adequate insurance. Number 2, develop comprehensive fraud contingency, disaster recovery, and business continuity plans. Third one, number 3, store backup copies of program and data files in a secure off-site location. And lastly, use software to monitor system activity and recover from fraud. Chapter 6, Computer Fraud and Abuse Techniques. Learning Objectives. So after studying this chapter, you should be able to: number 1, compare and contrast computer attack and abuse tactics. Number 2, explain how social engineering techniques are used to gain physical or logical access to computer resources. And number 3, describe the different types of malware used to harm computers. Introduction. So, ang sabi dito, ang cyber criminals ay gumagawa ng patuloy na pagtaas sa number of ways to commit computer fraud and abuse. So, in fact, ang krimen sa online ay lampas na sa $100 billion a year. So, ngayon, mas malaki na kaysa sa global illegal drugs trade. So, sabi pa din dito, some prolific online criminals boast of making $10,000 a day. So, this chapter discusses some of the common computer fraud and abuse techniques in 3 sections. First, computer attacks and abuse. Second, social engineering. And lastly, malware. So, these classifications are not distinct. There is a lot of overlap among the categories. So, for example, social engineering methods are often used to launch computer attacks. So, computer attacks and abuse. So, all computers connected to the internet, especially those with important trade secrets or valuable IT assets, are under constant attack from hackers, foreign governments, foreign governments, terrorist groups, disaffected employees, and industrial spies and competitors. So, itong mga people na nabanggit, sila yung mga nag-a-attack ng computers para maghanap ng valuable data or di kaya mag-try i-harm ang computer system. Hacking is the unauthorized access, modification, or use of an electronic device or some element of a computer system. So, sabi dito, karamihan sa mga hacker ay sumisira ng mga system tapos gumagamit sila ng mga known flaws in operating system or application programs or as a result of a poor access control. So, one software monitoring company estimates there are over 7,000 known flaws in software released in any given year. Hijacking, so gaining control of someone else's computers to carry out illicit activities such as sending spam without the computer user's knowledge. So, example is yung to forcibly stop and seize control of someone's vehicle in order to rob it or to reach a destination. So, especially sa mga airplane or trucks or boats. Botnet, short for robot network. So, a network of powerful and dangerous hijacked computers that are used to attack system or spread malware. So, according sa na-research ko, yung botnet daw is a network of infected computers used for criminal purposes. So, for example is, pwede rin yung computer mo could be a part of a botnet. So, without you even knowing, malware can turn your computer into a bot to be used for launching DDoS attacks, phishing, and spam campaigns, and online fraud campaigns. Zombie, used to attack system or spread malware. So, a hijacked computer, typically part of a botnet that is used to launch a variety of internet attacks. Bot herder, so the person who creates a botnet by installing software on PCs that responds to the bot herder's electronic instructions. So, it is also used the combined power of the hijacked computers to mount a variety of internet attacks. And lastly, denial of service or DOS attack. So, a computer attack in which the attacker sends so many email bombs or web page requests, often from randomly generated false addresses, so that the internet service provider's email server or the web server is overloaded and shut down.
Good morning. So, spamming. Spamming is a simultaneously sending the same unsolicited message to many people at the same time, often in an attempt to sell something. Like for example, lang yan is yung sa Facebook, diba? Like if we're not friends, your messages will be directly to a message request or the spamming. So next one is the dictionary attacks, also called as direct harvesting attacks. Spammers use special software to guess email addresses at a company and send blank email messages. SMS spoofing or using our short message services is to change the name or number a text message appears to count. Next one is web page spoofing or also called phishing. Not phishing, phishing. Hindi ko alam kung phishing ba yan. DNS spoofing is sniffing the ID domain name of system or DNS, the phone book of the internet that converts a domain or website name to an IP address request and replying before the real DNS server can. Zero-day attack or zero-hour attack is an attack between time new software vulnerability is discovered and the time a software developer releases a patch that fixes the problem. Next is the cyber crooks takes advantages of Microsoft security update cycle by timing new attacks right before or just after Patch Tuesday, second Tuesday of each month, and when the software maker releases its fixes. Cross-site scripting, or XSS, is a vulnerability in dynamic web page that allows an attacker to bypass a browser security mechanism and instruct the victim's browser to execute code, thinking it came from the desired website. Buffer overflow attack. It happens when the amount of the data entered into a program is greater than the amount of memory set aside to receive it. Okay, so very self-explanatory. SQL injection or insertion attack. Malicious code in the form of an SQL query is inserted into input so it can be passed and executed by an application program. Next one is man in the middle or MITM attack. Places a hacker between a client and a host and intercept network traffic between them. My God, so scary. Okay, so masquerading or impersonation is pretending to be an authorized user to access a system. Pretending to be authorized users. Yes, just like shall we see, hacker na din siguro, di ba? Kasi yung mga hacker is gumagamit ng ibang mga like accounts just to access the other system. Password cracking is penetrating system defenses, stealing the file containing the valid password. Wire dialing is programming a computer to dial thousands of phone lines, searching dial-up modern lines. Phreaking are the one hosts attacking phone system. Data diddling is changing data before or during entry into a computer system in order to delete, alter, oh my God, may Twitter pala dito, add or incorrectly update key system data. Data leakage is unauthorized copying of company data. Shall we say leakage naman, diba? My God. Pod slurping is using a small devices with storage capacity such as iPad or flash drive to download unauthorized data. Yes, more self-explanatory na din. Round down fraud, give a name to salami technique. Yes, ang mga pinagbabawal na technique is salami technique. The last one is the economic espionage, is the theft of information, trade secrets, and intellectual property. So that's all. Thank you.